Hi everyone. Thank you once again for joining us. This is Luvcoding.com. You can find us on our Facebook page, Luvcoding, or on our YouTube channel, Luvcoding. We are still in our Python tutorial, and we're still working on Python 3.6 using the Spider editor and the IPython console. Like I've explained in our video in string, you can easily get the Python editor by downloading Anaconda. It's free. You just go to Google and type Conda download and you get Anaconda. Today we shall be talking about functions in Python. We have talked about strings, list, tuple, and dictionary, all data types in Python. So today we shall be talking about functions. Functions are simply a set of codes or lines of codes that are designed to solve a problem or to do a certain thing. There are basically three things that a function must include in Python: a name, an argument or a parameter, then the description. Now let's look at examples of functions in Python. I've included a simple example here. This is a function, this is the name, but this function does not have an argument, and this is the description of what the function should do. Now when you describe a function, then you must have to call the function. And that is why we have the name of the function down here, trying to call this function. If we remove this name, you can assess the value or the characteristics of this function. So the description of the function could be anything. What the function is meant to do can be anything. In this case, this function is meant to calculate the average of a certain amount of numbers. So whatever amount of numbers you enter on the keyboard, from the keyboard, the function is meant to calculate the average and print it out on the keyboard. So let's see how it goes. Let's run this function here and see what the output will look like. Here we're going to be taking two variables from the keyboard. The first variable is the number of how many numbers we want to find the average. It could be 10, 100, 1,000, 1 million numbers. You'll be asked to enter all of the numbers you want to average. And here you enter each of the numbers one after the other. Then from this point, y equals 0, this is the full body of the function. When you enter these two values, this is what the function is meant to do. The function starts by checking the value of y equals 0. So what the function does is to follow this instruction. While y not equals z minus 1, continue to do this. So the function is going to be looping until y becomes z minus 1. And what is z? Z is a value I'm going to be putting in from the keyboard here. So whatever value you put in from the keyboard, you subtract 1 from the value, that gives you the new value of y. So here we start from the function starts at first time when y equals 0. It does this computation and prints the output. Oh, I need to add a print statement here, print y. Okay, there's already a return y here, return x. So this is going to give you the value that you're looking for at the end of the day. But if you don't want to use this, you can also add print x. That is the value you want to get from this function. At the end of the function, what are you expecting to get? You either put it in a print statement or you put it in a return statement. So here, the value we're expected to get at the end of this operation here is put in a return statement. For instance, let's run this and see what it looks like. Okay, so here is the output on the console. Here is the function that we just wrote. We're waiting for the output of the function. The system is kind of slow. Yeah, so it's kind of slow. It should be actually faster than this. So the first thing is, how many numbers do you have? That's the first thing you check. How many numbers do you have? You can have 1,000,000 numbers, 10,000,000 numbers, 1,000 numbers, whatever numbers, a number of numbers you have. Then you enter each of these numbers individually. Then the function is meant to calculate the average of all the numbers. So let's say we have two numbers. So we're going to put in 2 here. Then the first number, any number, we can say 90. Second number, we can say 87. And then the output is 177. The average continues. How many numbers do you have? Because we didn't give it a value to stop, to ask it to stop. So it's going to be doing this because there is nothing to say when this equals this, you stop. So we should have added like an if statement here. If y becomes a certain value, of if y is a certain thing, you stop. But while y is still less than this, z minus 1 is z is 2, 2 minus 1 is 1, and y is still less than 1. So it's going to repeat this for 2 times. But if we don't want it to repeat 2 times, we could add an if statement here. If y becomes, or if y greater than 2, stop. But for now, let's do the second one, and then the function is expected to stop at this point. So let's say we have the first numbers. I have 2 numbers. Enter first number 5. Enter first number. So it has run for the number of times that y is less than 1. While at the first time y was 0, that was this first computation. Second time, the value of y became 2, because we said 2 numbers, 2 minus 1, that is y became 1. So you did it again. So as long as y is not equal to 1, you're going to be doing this. So it had the function stopped running because y is already 1. It has run 0 for this value. At the initial state, at the initial time, when y equals 0, the function was executed. Then at the next level, y becomes 2, because we're going to be looking for 2 minus 1. So y becomes 2, 2 minus 1. This helps you to enter all the numbers you want to find the average. So it keeps taking all the numbers you want to find the average. So this is just a simple example of a function. Basically, 3 things are involved: the name of the function, an argument or a parameter, sometimes you do not need one, and then the description of what the function is expected to do. Finally, a print statement to show the output, or a return statement to return the value of y, particularly when you want to use the value in another function. This is another example here. No, I should look for a simpler example. Okay. Well, let's take this. This is a simple example. Let's just take it. So in this case, we have 2 functions, which is going to run as 1, because this sum problem function was not called. But here there's another function, main, and main was called eventually. So the first function is meant to sum 2 numbers with a parameter. The first function has 2 parameters. Like we said, every function has 3 parts: the name, the parameter or the argument, then the description. Here, this function expects 2 parameters. So before the function can be executed, you must be able to put in the values. So when you put in the values, then the function sums. That is what the function is meant to do, to sum the 2 values that you have entered. And then this line of statement will be compiled. And then the statement, whatever you get from here, we printed on the output console. So the sentence says the sum of, remember what this is, we have described it in our first and second and third video. So please, you can watch our video on string list, and tuple. We have talked about all this. So these are simply placeholders waiting for the value you're going to put in, the x value here, y value here, then the sum is here. The sum of x and y is this. So these are just placeholders which are waiting for the values you're going to be entering and then the final computation. Then I remember I described them first on the string video. When we talked about string, we described this and we said when you're going to be using this placeholder, you should be ending your statement with the dot format syntax, the dot format command. So you should end your statement by saying dot format the values you are expecting to fill the places that you have reserved. So dot format x and y and sum. Those are the values that will come in and fill up these spaces. So that's just basically what this function does. Takes two values as a parameter or argument and then sums them and prints a statement on the console. But this function was not called just like the way we called the other one. See, after we wrote this function here, we called it here so that it can be executed. But this second function was not called anywhere. But we have another function here which called the first function. So the second one is main. It can be any name. It mustn't be main. It can be any name. Now we are calling the function we have defined above. Sum problem 2 and 3. Remember I said the sum problem function must have two parameters or two arguments. If you do not include the two arguments, it will give you an error message. So sum problem, the two values you want to sum. Sum problem, these are the same thing, the function being called twice. This function, sum problem here, will give you one value here. This one give you one value here. Now the next one is, remember when this function is called, there is a print statement that ends the function. So if I say sum problem 2 and 3, it should be ending with a print statement that prints this sentence. The sum of 2 and 3 is the sum here. The addition of 2 and 3 will be here. If I call the second one, sum problem, if I call this function here, I will give it two values, the argument, and it will say the sum of this number and this number is here. That will be the eventually that's what's going to be printed on the console for you. Whenever you call the function sum problem, you're expecting to end with the statement. And the statement will include the values that you have entered and their sum. Unlike the first function where there is no print statement, I told you should either end your function with a print statement or with a return statement so that the value will be used or seen. But if you're going to be using the print statement, then the value cannot be passed. It can only be printed. If you want to use the print statement in some other functions, then you should put in the return value so that it can be able to, the function will return the value to whichever function is calling. But if you use the print statement, then it's not going to return any value to another function that calls it. Please, when you have if you have any questions, if you're on our website luvcoding.com, you can drop your comments on our comment boxes, or you can reach us on our contacts page. You can also equally send the chats across or send an email to us if you're a registered student. If you're on our YouTube channel, you're free to drop your questions or your comments, and then we'll get back to you. And if you're on our Facebook page, you are free also to put up your questions, and we'll also send the solution across. Thank you for joining Luvcoding.com once again. So as I was saying, the first function ended with a return statement because we're expecting it to return a value. But this function does not end with a return statement. It only prints the value eventually. So it's not going to be returning any value to anyone. It's only going to just print the value. Whenever you call this function, it ends up with printing the sentence. The sum of the two numbers you have entered is the answer or the solution. So we're going to run this now. Remember, they're all together. We'll run it. So look at how what the output looks like. The sum of 2 and 3 is 5. Where is that from? Here. When the function was called here, like I said, it ended with the print statement. So all it does is just to print this sentence that has been stated here. But it fills up the statement with the value from your argument, from your inputs, and then the sum of those inputs. That is how this is gotten. The sum of 2 and 3 is 5. The same thing with the second example. It just prints out the value. It's not going to pass the value to anyone, but just print it out on the screen. If you want the value to be passed to another function or to be used some other time in another function or to be called some other time, then it should end into the return statement. So whenever the function is called, it returns a value that you can use for further computation. So this second part is running now. This part has been executed. This part has been executed. We are now on the third part that says why we put the integer here is to cast whatever value we're going to be entering, because the value is going to be entered as a string. If I say input this, enter an integer, you enter a number, the number will be a string, except you cast it with an integer data type here. So you must include an int here to cast whatever value you're going to be getting from the keyboard, which is a string. If you don't do this, then it will not be possible to add both numbers. So that is this one here now. So we enter an integer, maybe 8. So enter another integer. The second line is running now. We enter sum A and B. This line was not executed. Okay, yeah, here. The sum of 8 and 9 is 17. So this is the execution of the last line. So it's, remember, the Python is an interpreted language. So interpret everything line by line. So that is why you see all the lines here. So this is the first one, enter an integer. Second one, enter an integer, another integer. Finally, the sum of 8 and 9 is 17. So let's look at how we call a function. Although we have described it in these two examples, but let's talk about it a bit, because sometimes it behaves differently. So there are so many ways you can call the function, like the one we have seen here, just a direct call. You can just call the function directly. Because this function does not require an argument, we just write the name of the function and a bracket in front of it. The main function does not require an argument, but the sum problem function requires 2 arguments. That is why you must include the 2 arguments anytime you call the sum problem function. The same with the average function here. It doesn't require an argument or it doesn't require an argument or parameter. So when you're running it, you don't need to include anything in the bracket. So let's see how functions are called. Generally, functions are called by reference, but you can either call them directly or call them in another function, just like you have seen. I just want to explain it more. So look at the first function, print this. This is in the function we are defining, the print this. It requires an argument, which is a string. So what it does is just to print the value you have added to it. If you give it any value, what it does is just to print the value. Remember, it requires an argument, so the parameter must be included before the function can be executed. So if we run this now, it's not going to do anything, but because we have called it here, so when we say print this, so this is as simple as just putting a print statement and putting the string. But because it's a simple example, it looks as if it's not in all cases that you see it this simple, but this is just a simple example to make you see how functions are called. So I've just defined the function here, and I'm calling the function here. I put in this is the first example, this is the second example, because the function requires an argument before it can be executed without an error message. So we can run this. All it does is just to print out the value, the argument on the screen. It's as simple as that. Let's see other functions, calling a function from another function. So here I define the function called square. Square needs an argument x. When I call this function square and put in a value, what it returns for me is a value times the same value. So that is square. But I've not called this function here. But I'm going to be calling this function in another function, just like I've done before. I'm just trying to explain how it is called. Yeah, I did it here. Define some problem here and call some problem here, but we never used it for anything. We just called it just to call it and see how it works. But here we're going to be using it directly. So we define the function here as square of a number. When you put in a number, it multiplies the number by itself and returns the value. Remember, the return is going to be returning. So whenever you want the value from the function to be used in another function, then you must use the return statement. So the second function, multiply. Multiply takes a number, enter the number to multiply, and then num2 converts it to integer. You can equally add int here on the bracket like we saw before. So I just did it separately so that you can see. So when you enter a value here, it's going to be string. The value is automatically is a string value. You need to convert or cast it to an integer value by just putting int beside the variable name. Now, what multiply is a function of its own, and what multiply does is to get squared of numbers. And it doesn't need to start doing the square afresh because there's already a function called square. So multiply takes a number and then square it by using this function. So it might look so simple, but we are having or solving a more complicated problem. Then you see the usefulness of defining the function and then calling the function with a return command. So when I call multiply, it takes a number from the keyboard, then square the number by using the square function. But the good thing about this is I can use this to do as many things as possible. I can also add something like maybe multiple equals I can something like squared. Sorry, I want to use the squared. This makes your code neater. If I have to be writing everything in the same function, it will be cumbersome and more confusing. So multiple equals squared plus 5 or plus 20, anything. Just to show you how important it is to define this little function somewhere and then use it somewhere. So here I will say print this yellow here, this yellow alert here, whatever, is trying to tell us there's a problem. And what's the problem? The local variable multiple is assigned but not to use because I've not mentioned multiple anywhere. So I need to print multiple. So I printed this here to make sure that the same, just tap on it, and if it highlights the same color, the same highlight color, then you know they're the same, the spellings are correct. So this function multiply now takes a value, square the value, then add 20 to the value. But if I don't have this square function here, it will require using maybe norm times norm. That's because this is simple. So for more complicated codes, you will know that it's very useful to have a separate function doing many separate functions, doing so many things, and then a final function that compiles everything together. So let's run this. So let's see what it gives us. Enter the number to multiply. Remember, we are calling the multiply function, not the square function. We're only using the value of the square function here. So number to multiply, maybe 6. It returns 56. What it does is to square the number I have entered, it to get the square and then add 20 to the square. So see how we can call a function from another function. So I said we could either call it directly by just putting the name of the function and a bracket. Then if there's an argument, we add the argument in the bracket. Just call the function directly or call the function from another function, just like I've done. There are other ways you can also call the function. For instance, look at this. This function is midpoint, which takes basically two numbers, because just looking for the midpoint of two numbers, not average. You have done the average here. If you want to get the average, yeah, we have looked at average up here. So now we're looking for midpoint. So this function takes two numbers and find a midpoint. So take the length and the breadth and then calculate A, where A is the midpoint. We can call this midpoint. Midpoint. Yeah, it has to be different from this one. So print midpoint. Return, it's going to return midpoint. Anytime you call that value, that function midpoint is going to return midpoint. So, but we have not called it. So let's go down and see how we can call it. Several ways. We can call it simply by using the print statement. Print midpoint. Remember, midpoint takes two arguments. Print midpoint 3 and 6. Print square 9. Okay, the square 9 we're calling, remember the square here, the square function here, square, and the square needs an argument, one single argument. It returns the square of the argument. Midpoint needs two values and return their midpoint. Then print this. I'm learning this. These are three different functions. We're just calling them individually. This calls the midpoint function, this calls the square function, and this calls the print this function. So using the print this function, you don't need to include the print statement anymore, because what the print this function does is to just print out whatever value is given to it on the console. So we can run this now. Yeah. So the first one, midpoint of 3 and 6, used this function to calculate the midpoint of 3 and 6 and gave us 4.5. The second one, square of 9, used the function square to calculate the square of 9 and gave us 81. Then the last one, to print this function, just return the value. So this is just calling them directly. We could also call them like in the statement like this. Print, okay, this is not, these two lines are, print, please enter two numbers to get their midpoint. A, you enter the first number, please enter first number, enter second number. The midpoint of the two numbers is, you reserve a space with a placeholder, dot format, they now call the function here. You see how this function is called here? Different from how we have been calling it. You just use a statement to call the function. The midpoint of the numbers is, you reserve the space to get the midpoint, and then you call the function by adding up the dot format command. So it's the same thing. The only difference is, rather than calling it directly or calling it in a function, we just called it using a statement, and then we use dot format command to finish up the statement and added the function that we want to run. So we can run this. Let's see what it looks like. So you print, okay, this is the code. So print this. Please enter two numbers to get a midpoint. Please enter first number. These are just very basic and simple. The midpoint is 8 and 5. So we have used this last statement here to print the midpoint on the console. Okay, so we're still talking about function. Remember, you're free to ask your questions. If you're on our YouTube channel, drop your questions. I will get back to you. If you're on our Facebook page, you're welcome to drop your questions. And if you're a lady in our Lady Pythoneer group, then we can answer your questions privately. If you're on our website, luvcoding.com, you can drop your question on the chat box. You can drop it on the comment box. You can send us an email if you're registered with us. And if you need more explanation, please, you can also reach out to us, or you have further addition, you're welcome to add recommendations and additions and whatever. Okay, so functions are called by reference. So let's see. This means that if you change what a parameter, remember the parameter, if you change what a parameter refers to within the function, it will reflect on the function that is calling. So if I give a value to the function, the parameter, if I give a value to the parameter inside the function, and I come down to change the value that I've given to that parameter, it will reflect on this function that is on whichever function that is calling. Let's take it again. If I give a value to my list is a parameter, and I've given a value to my list as my list.append this. This is the value I've given to my list, and I'm expecting to see this on the board, because whenever I run this function, or I call this function here, it's going to just simply print my list. So let's call the function and see before we do something else. So let's call the function here. We'll run it. My list is not defined. Changes my list. Let's do it. Let's see what's going on. Changes my list. Okay, yeah. We'll have to it requires us to add a value to my list. Remember, my list is an argument. It requires us to add a value to my list. So we need to add something. So let's just use the example we have initially to continue, so that we don't cause confusion. So we want to call this function. We have to add a parameter, and we have defined or described the parameter as any list 1. So whatever parameter we have, if we put it in this function, it's going to return that parameter dot append this. What it's trying to say is that this my list argument here has been given a value here, and while calling the function, we gave my list a different value. So because of giving it a different value, it's going to reflect the change is going to be reflected here. So it will first of all call the original my list, and then call the list my list that we have put in, and then append this value to that my list that we have put in. So let's just run it, then we can explain it from there. So this is what's going to give us. The first time this print statement was executed, that is this one here, 10, 20, 30, because it needs a parameter my list, and the parameter has been entered here. The parameter can be any name. What is the most important thing is that this change this is expecting a value, and the value has been given here. So whatever value, so this is the value we are given, any list 1. Any list 1 is a list. So all this change this function requires is a list. It requires a list, and then it will append whatever value in that list. It will append this value to that new value or new argument or new parameter that you have defined. So the parameter is referring to this, and here we have changed this. It's going to come out. The final the output is going to reflect. That's what I'm trying to say. You call parameter functions by reference. What this means is that whatever value you give to the parameter in the function will always reflect. So whatever value you give it in here is what is going to be reflecting here. There is no how I can call this function without it appending this. It must append this, even though we have changed the value, it's going to be appending this to the value. So it's going to be affecting this call. This call will be affected by the original value of my list here, which is this. So we assume my list is an empty list, and we append this list to it, and then we change the value of my list to this. It is definitely still going to append this value to it. So that's what I've just seen here. I hope it's clear. If it's not clear, please just drop your questions, as I've said earlier. But there's another case where you do the same thing and it's not reflecting. And here we have my list. Sorry, this is supposed to be my list. Can't use any list. It's supposed to be my list. Because this is the name, my list is the name of the argument. So this must be my list. So the function expects a parameter, and when you give it the parameter, it converts the parameter to 1, 2, 3, 4. So originally the parameter is given the value, and it's like a permanent value. It has been given my list equals. So this is the value of my list. So it's not going to make any difference anytime you change the value. Unlike the former example, when you change the value, it still reflects the original value of my list. This is the original value. When I change the value of the parameter, the original value still reflects on it. But in this case, the parameter has been given a permanent value. So this is the permanent value of my list. That the parameter now has a permanent value. So even if I change the value, because I've already said this is what my list is equals this. This is the value of my list anytime. So when I change the parameter, the value of parameter is not going to reflect. So this is, we're having a cello sign here because my list is not, we didn't include it here. I need to print any list. There's no any list at all from anywhere. So we need to change the name of this to this. So now this is any list, or we can still use my list if we want, but I just want to use any list to make you see the difference. This is the we're trying to call the function here. So, but before you call the function change this, you must give it a parameter. And now remember, the original value of the parameter is 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we are giving the parameter a different value, but it's not going to reflect because this assignment statement has assigned a permanent value to my list. So let's see it. Let's just run it and see it. But please, if you have any question, please don't hesitate to drop your comments or on the chat or on the comment box. So let's take it. The first, okay, let's remove this so that I can get it better. Let's remove this. Okay, let's run it again so I can get it better. Yeah, so this is very easy to understand now. This is the first print statement in the function, and inside the function the value of the parameter is 1, 2, 3, 4. That is the value of the parameter. So we're expecting that whenever we call this function and give it a parameter value, is going to return 1, 2, 3, 4 because that is the value. We have said my list equals this. So at all time when we call it, it's going to give us this. So in this, when we are trying to call the change this function, we gave it a parameter value. Definitely you have to include the parameter value for the function to be executed. And now we gave it a value called any list, which is a new list, and we say change this any list. Anytime you call this change this function, remember you are going to include the parameter, and whatever parameter you include is going to give you the value. The function is going to produce an output based on the parameter you have added. But it's telling us none. The first print statement here, print my list, is printed my list as it is here. Second one says print, using a print statement, I want to see the value of the function using our list, our new parameter, any list, or the same my list, and it says none because my list. Okay, if you think the problem is in the name, we can change the name back to my list to show that the problem is not in the name, but because we have assigned the permanent value to the parameter. So sorry, we'll now take any list to be, let's change the name to my list so that it bears the same name with the original name of the parameter. Let's see if that makes a difference. So let's run this and see. No difference, because you have given a permanent value to my list in the function. So whenever you call the change function my list, you're expecting to get the value you have given to the parameter. You have given a permanent value to the parameter. Because of that, whenever you call the function change this and you give it a parameter, a value for the parameter, it will still just you to still print just the value of the original parameter that that was included in the function, and then for your own print statement, it's going to give you none, because there is nothing it can do with this new parameter value. It's keeping its old parameter value because it can't do any. What is it going to do? Nothing. It just prints this statement, my list equals this. It prints it here. Then when you say change this my list, whenever you call it, you just print this. That's what the function does. So I'm just showing you different ways of calling a function, and then I want to summarize it by saying that you call the function by reference. That means whatever value you have, if you change the value of the parameter when you're calling, it will reflect on the value. But unfortunately, in this case, it's not reflecting because the parameter was given a permanent value in the function. So because it has a permanent value in the function, whenever you call the function, it's just gonna, because it's not gonna do much other than to print. That is what the function does. Anytime you call the function, you are asking it to just print my list, and my list is 1 2 3 4. So it's not going to do anything to your new list. So even if you change the name of your new parameter, it's not going to do anything because there's nothing that has been asked that the function should do. Not like this case, what this function will append this value to your value. So whenever you enter any parameter at all and you want to use this function to work on the parameter, it will simply append 1 2 3 4 to the parameter you have added. So whenever I put in any parameter at all, because if you're going to use the function, you must need a parameter. And whenever I put in any parameter at all, what the function does is to append 1 2 3 4 to that parameter, to the value of the parameter. Unlike the second example, it's very important to understand this. Unlike the second example, where you have given a permanent value to my list and it's not asked to do any other thing other than to print my list. So whenever you call, anything you put here, it doesn't matter. Even if I change the values, it doesn't matter because the function only prints the value of my list, nothing else. It doesn't append, doesn't multiply, doesn't do anything, doesn't add, just print the value because the value is 1 2 3 4. Whenever you call the function change this, it's just going to print the value 1 2 3 4 for you, despite whatever value you're going to put here, because the function has not been asked to do much. I think we have spoken long on that. So let's go to the next topic on function. Now let's look at the type of argument you can have in a function. Remember I said there are basically 3 things you need for a function: the name of the function, a parameter or an argument, and the description of what you are expecting the function to do. Now, there are different kinds of arguments you can include in a function. The first one is required argument. Required argument simply is when you include a parameter or an argument, the function cannot run correctly without giving you an error message when that argument is missing. So that is a required argument. If you include an argument or a parameter in your function description, whenever you call the function anywhere, it's not going to run because it's expecting you to add a value. So let's run this and see. Print this missing one required positional argument. It requires an argument, anything. We'll call it any string. It can be any name. So when we say print this is the function. We'll call the function here, print this. It will print any string. But because nothing has been entered here, so let's enter a string. Let's enter this and then we'll run the function again. It's expected that you enter a value before you can use the print this function. So whatever value you enter, it will carry out the instruction, the function instruction on that value. I like this call. So you have entered the parameter or argument for it, you have entered the value for it, and you're asking it to print this argument, and it does. But whenever you call the function and there is no parameter included, it's not going to do anything because you have not asked to do anything for you. So another kind of argument or parameter is a keyword argument. Let's see how the keyword argument goes. Using the same print this function, and you must include any string or anything at all. If you don't want to, if you don't want that, you can remove this and then run the function without a parameter. But because it has a parameter, you must always call the parameter. Now, what of the keyword parameter? The keyword parameter is where we want to use just exactly the name that has been included with the function. In this case, any string. Any string is a name that has been included with the function. Whenever we want to describe the function, we must use any string as its keyword. If you use any other name, it's not going to work. Let's run this, then I'll change the name and see how it goes. So when I call this function, it printed, I love this. Okay, now let's remove this name and put another name. Let's say YouTube. Let's say YouTube equals I love this and run it. No keyword. Print this got an unexpected keyword. But if you don't want the trouble of keyword, just remove the whole thing entirely. Where's the delete key? Delete, okay. And you're done. Because basically, to the flight mode. No, I don't want the flight mode off, yeah. So we're trying to call this function. And remember, the function requires an argument. Enter, the function does print the argument for you, and that is it. But because we want to use it as a keyword, we can change it to anything. We can call it A. So talking about the keyword arguments, we can say A equals. So you are the one that caused the problem by making A equals this. You will just want to use exactly the keyword that's included with the function. And then when you run it, it's going to give you an error message. There is no keyword A. The wrong keyword has been... Oh, sorry. I used the right keyword. Let me change the keyword. Put anything. Sorry. I'll put any blah, blah, blah here. Blah blah. Okay, so let's run it to get. I want to get an error message. No keyword as blah blah. Okay, so I can remove the blah blah. I have an exact word that I have here before I can use the equal sign. I want to assign the value to A. That is the keyword argument. I run it. It's going to print. So if I don't want the trouble of keyword, all I need to do is remove the word, the letter, or whatever variable name I've used. So if I do this now, I'm not going to have any problem because there's no keyword involved. No problem. So let's see another example of the keyword argument. Using this we can use as much as you like. So print this sex and age, and we'll say what the function does. It prints sex. Remember, this is just a string. The string will just be displayed on this console. We have talked about strings and how they work. So the string is just going to be displayed on the console. So print sex is the sex that we're going to give it. Print age is the age that we're going to assign to the keyword. So we'll return. Now print this same function. We're calling it now, and we assign a value to age. Age equals 50. Sex equals female. This is an example of keyword argument. We want to use exactly the same keyword in the parameters or the argument of the function and assign a value to them. If you run this, it's not going to give you any problem. It's going to run smoothly. Now let's look for trouble by putting something different from the original keyword and something different from the original keyword here. So we can just run it. No keyword, like this blah 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 we have added. So if you don't want to have the problem of keyword, just remove this entirely, so that it doesn't appear anywhere here or here. If you don't want the keyword problem, okay, so we'll just say this. Say 20. That is okay. So we'll just do something simple like this, and then the problem is solved. So say sex is sex, age is age. So if you do something simple like that, the problem is solved. But the moment you say sex equals 30, whatever, age equals whatever, you are looking for the keyword problem. So to avoid such problem, just give the values for the two arguments. All the function needs are just two. The function just needs two arguments for it to be executed. So when you enter two arguments, that's it. But if you want to make it a keyword argument, then you must use exactly the keyword that was added, age equals 32, and if you don't spell it correctly, it's going to give you an error message. Control C and Control V, sex equals female, and then that is it. So you can see age. Oh, you see, you must spell it correctly. That is the problem with keyword argument. It must be exactly the same spelling. Everything must be the same, or it's going to give you an error message. So now let's talk about the default argument. We have talked about two types of argument. We have four types. We've talked about the required argument, talked about the keyword argument. Now we're going to be talking about the default argument. Default argument is when we assign a permanent value, just like what we have faced before in this example of function where we assign the permanent value to the parameter. We assign the permanent value is now a default value. We assign the permanent value to the parameter. So whenever we change the value of the parameter outside the function, it's not going to do anything because we have given a permanent value to the parameter. That's the problem we had here. So let's look at it again. Default argument parameters, or default arguments or parameters. So we have assigned a permanent value to age. So whenever we call age, we should be expecting age to be 35. And name, we'll give a value for name. So if we run this, print this 2. This is the name of the function, print this 2. It needs two values. One is name. We have to put the value of name. We don't need to put the value of age because age is already there. So let's run it and see what's going to give us. So name is Peter. Age is 70. But in the second example, we never included age. And we run that, it gave us name is Peter and age is 35 because there is already a default value for age. But when you include another value for age, it override the value in the parameter. So here we say age equals 70, name equals Peter. So when we say age equals 70, it changes the value of age to 70 in the parameter. And when we say name Peter without the age, it just takes the value of age here. So that is why it gives us name Peter and age 35. The final kind of argument you can have with the function is a variable length argument. The variable length argument is whereby you have one argument here that is fixed, and then here you have as much as you can remove this and have just this. You can remove this and have just this. They can. It's not. You mustn't have both of them. But what this does, this asterisk any name, asterisk any name, what it does is to allow you to key in as much value as possible. In this case, this is a separate argument on its own, and it's a separate arrangement for itself. So let's see now print output is. Let's just put it together. Output is comma Control V. Let's remove this print statement here. So it will print the output is this argument. That is for this one. Remember I said you can remove this and have just this, because this helps you to key in as much. If you want to use var tuple with the asterisk sign will help you to key in as much values as possible. When you don't know how many values you're going to be expecting, that is when you use the variable length argument. So to print out the values of the variable length argument, we have used the for loop statement. So for anything in that variable list, print anything. So whatever we'll enter, even if we enter 30, 40, 50 numbers, it's going to be printing anything. for whatever value you have here, print those values individually. That's what this is trying to tell us. So look at the first function call here. We'll call the function here first with one value for argument 1. That is print output is argument 1. So whenever you put in any, they are not going together. This is going on its own. This is going on its own. So whenever you put in any value for argument 1, one value, then it takes the value and prints output is that value. But in second case, you can enter as much as you want. If I remove this, the first one can run on its own. Let's run with just one argument. Just going to print output is 10. Remember, whenever you call the function print this, and give it a parameter, remember you're going to give it a parameter called argument 1. What it does, just to print output is argument 1. Whenever called this expects a tuple of variable length. So we can also close this and run the second one. Remove this. So this is a print 3 using the variable length argument. So we can run this. Okay, don't you can put this in comma. Yeah, that's although it can run even with that, with the yellow alert, it can still run. So this is it here. So variable tuple, variable length tuple, or variable length argument allows you to put in as much values as possible, and then the same function will be executed on that number of items you have added. Now, moving on, let's look at a kind of function called an anonymous kind of function called lambda. Lambda is anonymous because you do not define it using the def. Remember, every statement, every function starts with a def command or reserved word. But the anonymous functions do not need to start with the def reserved word or keyword. You just use them directly in one straight line. The anonymous function do not need you to start to describe them using the def keyword. You just write them straight in a single line. Like we can see here, my sum equals lambda is an anonymous function. It takes two parameters like a usual function and does a computation on the parameters. But the difference is that whilst you use other function, you include the def reserved word, you don't need to do that for lambda. You don't need to do the full description, just the name of the function and the description. So my sum is a variable that's going to return the value of this expression here. So the expression is lambda takes argument 1 and argument 2, then it sums them by adding both of them. My sum2, the same kind of function, takes lambda takes 3 arguments, just to tell us that lambda can take as much argument as possible, but everything must be in a single expression. So it takes argument 1, 2, 3, and then multiplies argument 1 and 2, and then add argument 3. It must be in a single expression. That is a law or rule for using the lambda function. It must be in a single, no double expression is expected. So we can run this to show you how it works. Very useful when you want to, like the square function here can be written with a lambda. Where's the small square function can be written with lambda. We can call it square equals lambda x. X, then put colon. Let's come and write it down here. We'll have the lambda. Let's add the third function, square. SQUARA. Oh. Square equals, I want to copy the name. I don't want to start typing. That's why I'm here. Control C equals Control V, and this X. Then when you get to the value, it will now return X times X. So that's it. simple as that. So we also have to print, see, we need to print value, print square. I'm copying so that I can make sure the names are exactly the same, because if the names are not the same, you're going to be having a problem. Print square of, let's say print square of 10. No, it needs an argument. So print square of 10, then print my sum of 10 and 2, and print my sum 2 of 3 numbers. Remember, it needs 3 numbers for my sum 2. So we can run everything together and see the 3 print statements on the console. So these are the 3 print statements on the console. The first one is for the square. So I just told you that the square function above is so small, we could just use the lambda anonymous function to execute the square function, because it's so small and just straightforward. Even if it has like 4 or 5 keywords, and you're going to be multiplying everything maybe to form like the cube or square the cube, whatever you want to do, you can just do everything in a single line, rather than using the def keyword. You just do it straightforward in a single line, since it requires just one single parameters and a single short simple expression. So print square 10 gave us 100. My sum 10 and 2, my sum take 2 values and adds them up, 30, and value of total, my sum will be my sum 2029. So my sum 2029 will take 3 arguments, which is the 3 arguments, and add them together and give you the value as 409. Take 3, okay, argument 1 times argument 2, 20 times 20 plus 9. So that is the anonymous function using lambda. Now the return statement, I have talked about the return statement. I think that should be okay. I think we have one more. Oh, we have 2 more. Okay, we have about 3 more topics to go. Okay, we've talked about the return statement above. We have repeated the return statement. I told you it's very useful if we're going to be returning a value to another function. The return statement is very useful. You can return a value from a function as follows. So we have actually described it, just to run down through it. So we call a function here, we define a new function here called difference that needs 2 numbers, and then diff is what it's going to do, the variable that stores the computational value. So diff equals argument 1 minus argument 2. So whatever value you enter, even if it's going to come out as a negative output, whatever value you enter here and enter here, this value will be subtracted from this one. So we can make it better by adding other instructions to make it always come out as positive. But that is maybe another time. So diff equals argument 1 minus argument 2. This function returns the value of argument 1 minus argument 2. So when you've entered 2 values to this function, it will return the value of both of them. So print difference of 10 and 20. Difference is the name of the argument function. The function needs 2 arguments, and the value that will be returned is 20, is the difference. So let's run this. This is a very simple and straightforward function. So it just returns minus 10 because it just subtracts one from the other and returns the value. Very useful when you're going to be calling that in another function. You don't have to repeat it over and over again. Now, the global and the local variables, this is another very useful thing you need to know. Maybe as we go on in advanced Python, you will see the usefulness of all these functions we have been describing. So here, this is a variable here called total. I will say total equals 0. After defining this, we now define our sum. Any variable that comes before the sum definition in the same code is a global variable. Any variable that you have mentioned or named before the function, and you're using that variable inside the function or outside the function, that variable is a global variable. So you can call it from anywhere around the function. So if you want this total to be a global variable for all the function on this window here on this screen, then take it to the topmost part of the screen. Then whenever you call total, it gets the value of total. but now I just want to use it within these few lines of code here. So def my sum needs two arguments, argument 1 and argument 2. It calculates total, argument 1 plus argument 2, then it prints total. Here total is going to change, the value of total is going to change from 0 to whatever value is going to get after adding this and this together. But in this case, and then when you say print my sum will add two numbers together and return total, the value. Then but this second print total does not have any connection with this function. It's just on its own. All it does is just to print the value of total, which is 0. So we can just run it. 0. So remember, there are 3 print statements. Print total here, print the first 30 from here. So this 30 is from here. Second print 1, the second 30 is from here. Then this last value total here, 0, because like I said, total has not been used in this. It's a global variable. You have called it in the sum, in the function. Whenever you use the function returns the total of this and this. But in this case, the total and now is outside the function. It just prints the value of the global variable 0, and that is why it's printed 0 on the console. Finally, okay, so this is just like a repetition of what you have done earlier, calling a function without a parameter. So it's also possible to, I just want to use it to tell us or inform us or remind us that you can also call a function without a parameter. And when that happens, it means everything is going to happen inside the parameter, and then the return statement will return the value of the function, and then you call the parameter, the function without any parameter, and it will execute correctly. So I just added it here, just like a top up, to just remind us that you could also call a function without a parameter. It's been nice talking to you. This has been Luvcoding.com. We have been on our Python tutorial. Today we talked about functions. We've talked about strings, lists, tuples, dictionaries. This is functions we are discussing about today. Remember, we're still working on the Anaconda framework using the Spider editor and the IPython console. If you want to get this window or this platform for your Python coding, just go online and download Conda. When you download Conda, it will give you Anaconda. In Anaconda, you have an integrated version of the Python Spider and the IPython console, which gives you this window. If you have any question, you're free to ask us on our YouTube channel, Luvcoding. You can drop your comments with your questions. We'll answer you privately. If you're on our Facebook page, you can ask your question or you drop your comment. Or if you are in our lady group, Lady Pythoneer, you're free to ask your questions. If you're on our website, you can drop your questions on the chat box or the comment box, or better still, if you're registered with us, you can send us an email and we'll give you a response as soon as possible. So we talked about function today. We hope you have enjoyed the class, and you're going to be joining us in our next topic, which is the file input output in function. So today we looked at examples of functions. We looked about different examples, talked about how to call a function directly or calling it from another function. Talked about calling the function with a statement. Then we explained how functions are called by reference, so that when you change the value in a calling function, it will still reflect back on the calling function. We talked about different arguments for a function in Python. We talked about the anonymous function called the lambda. Sorry, not called lambda. Rather, we talked about one anonymous function, the lambda. The return statement, global and local variables in Python function, and finally we also explained that a function can also be freely called without a parameter. Thank you so much. It's been nice having you. We hope you're going to be joining us in our next episode, and we hope you're enjoying your time with us. It's still Luvcoding.com. Please, you can like, you can share, subscribe to our channel in YouTube. Thank you for having you today. See you next time.